Hello, welcome to another edition of Security Africa.
And just today, we reimposed all sanctions.
The sanctions kicking in at midnight Sunday target Iran's oil exports, banking, and shipping, plus hundreds of officials, even though UN inspectors say Iran is still complying with the nuclear deal.
Warfare is no longer limited to trench warfare, armada of ships, or tank warfare. From the last episode, you can begin to appreciate that warfare has changed its character. As warfare has changed, so has national security changed as well. Consequently, this has changed the dynamics of internal security of the African countries. So those involved in guaranteeing national security of the respective countries should also know that the dynamics of internal security has changed as well. For instance, the police forces across Africa are finding it difficult today to deal with the sophistication of the 21st century criminals. You might be asking, why is this happening? This is because crime and criminals of the 21st century are sophisticated beyond the capacity of the traditional police forces in Africa. Similarly, the national intelligence agencies of various African countries are also finding it difficult to have real-time intelligence needed to guarantee the integrity of their respective national borders. You may also ask, why would that be? This is because the intelligence required to maintain the integrity of the international borders or national borders are no longer coming from the traditional sources of intelligence. Warfare has changed all this. Now, warfare has also changed to the extent that hardly will there be combat between African forces today. The chances of that happening is very remote. You can now see that everything about warfare and national security has changed in this 21st century. This is why at the Afrika Security Television, AFRISEC for short, we are making all efforts to unmask the new form of warfare so that Africa can be safe again. And that is what we are doing right now. So, how do other nations attack African nations in this 21st century? How is warfare conducted in the 21st century? How is national security guaranteed in the 21st century? You want to know? Don't worry. Stay tuned on this channel. We will serve you all the details very soon. In the last edition, you learned of the nature and the characteristics of this warfare. You also understood the 6 templates used as its vehicle of conveyance, namely, number 1, the structure of international paid proxy fighters that manifest as terrorists, armed bandits, kidnappers, cattle rustlers, and armed robbers, just to mention a few. Number 2, the structure of majority ethnic or religious domination. Number 3, the structure of exploitation of African natural resources. Number 4, the structure that will undermine and remove legitimate state powers of African nations by non-state actors. Number 5, the structure that creates and equips violent non-state actors to contest the power of cohesion of African nation states. Number 6, the structure of cultural subversion. I also promise that in this episode, you will understand the definition of the 21st century warfare in Africa. But before I do that, please permit me to mention some other effects of these 6 structural templates. This is what is going to come up next. Welcome back. So, when you pull together all the 6 templates enumerated earlier, they will definitely have devastating effects across the African continent. These structures will produce security challenges that manifest as ethno-religious wars, secessionist agitations, intertribal hostilities, religious intolerance, economic strangulation, and social upheaval. If these things are happening in your country, it means that these templates are alive in your country. Politically, it will manifest as deep-rooted political divisions across the internal political structures of many African countries, where politics has become a war fought by Africans to kill each other and destroy property. This is why many political activities in Africa are violent, leading to assassinations, mob actions, political wrangling, violent electoral processes, disputed elections, and sometimes armed conflict. In addition, the control of African political structures by both external state and non-state actors has made most African leaders to use their offices to pursue foreign interests, multinational interests, globalist agenda, and their personal interests rather than the interests of their respective nations. Most African electorates feel very disappointed with the performance of their respective governments year in, year out. This has greatly affected national security of many African nations. Hardly will you get any African country that the citizens are happy with their political class. This disappointment has been shown on the streets in many African countries like in Tunisia, Algeria, Egypt, Malawi, Gabon, Sudan, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Have you ever asked yourself, why is this happening? Is it that the politicians were lying to the electorates, or they forgot their electoral promises, or something strange is happening behind the scene? Now listen to this. The truth is that most African political leaders have been captured by the combatants of the 21st century warfare in Africa. And some of them are prisoners of war in their various presidential palaces across the African continent. They must take orders and directives from the captors. You may be asking, who are these their captors? How were the African political leaders arrested or imprisoned? Now listen to this.
And once these presidents were elected, someone who looks like me walks into the office and says, "Congratulations, Mr. President." And now I just want to remind you that I can make you and your family very, very rich if you play my game, our game. Or I can see to it that you're thrown out of office or assassinated if you decide to fulfill your campaign promises. And usually it's said a little more subtly than that because there may be a tape recorder listening. But they get the message because every one of those presidents knows what happened to Arbenz of Guatemala, and Allende of Chile, and Roldos of Ecuador, and Lumumba of the Congo, and Torrijos, and on. The list is very long of presidents that we have had thrown out or assassinated. There's no question about that. And they all know this. So we perpetuate the system that way. Here you offer from this pocket, you offer a few $100 million, corruption. Or from this pocket, you offer subversives, jackals, to go in and overthrow the government or assassinate the president.
Did you hear that? You want to know more? Don't worry. Just stay tuned on this channel. There is a separate episode that will explain all these intrigues in greater details. So it will be difficult for Africa to be politically stable, or for any African political leader to transform his country to a stable, peaceful and prosperous nation. It might be possible, but it's going to be difficult. Unfortunately, some African political elites are yet to correctly understand why their respective nations are unstable. As long as the current political climate prevails, along with the mindset of the present political class, Africa will require lots of prayers and God's intervention to be peaceful, stable, and secure. For now, let's make do with the few political effects. But how does this warfare affect the African economy? The African economy today is not insulated from the devastation of this warfare. African economies are in tatters. Currencies are almost worthless, with high cost of living beyond the citizens.
One thing that keeps me puzzled, despite having studied finance and economics at the world's best universities, the following question remains unanswered. Why is it that 5,000 units of our currency is worth 1 unit of your currency, where we are the ones with the actual gold reserves? It's quite evident that the aid is in fact not coming from the West to Africa, but from Africa to the Western world. The Western world depends on Africa in every possible way, since alternative resources are scarce out here. So how does the West ensure that the free aid keeps coming? By systematically destabilizing the wealthiest African nations.
Many African countries have been dragged into bottomless pit of debt to the extent that most of them cannot repay their debts. So what happens next when they cannot repay their debt? This condition will put most of these African countries in desperate mode. As a result, some African countries will be forced to borrow more money, meaning going into more debt. Others will be forced to sell off their national assets or privatize them. In any case, the African national assets are changing ownership. So, if that happens, what is left for the future generation of Africans? How will they cope without their national assets? How will that affect the national security of most of these African countries? You want to know? Don't worry. Just stay tuned on this channel. You will be served a full episode very soon. Now that you have understood the few effects of the seed structures on the African economy and politics, what are the effects on the African population? The best way to destroy a nation is to destroy the young population. This is because the young population is the future of that nation. How did these templates affect the African youths? Now, the hearts and minds of the African youths have been subverted, manipulated and brainwashed to believe that killing their fellow citizens and destroying their respective communities will earn them heaven or paradise. They believe they are heaven-bound if they spill the blood of fellow citizens and destroy their own countries. You can imagine. This mindset is terrifying. This ideology is very dangerous. I expect every African political leader to openly condemn this teaching and mindset. In fact, I expect it to be discussed at the African Union meeting by heads of government. This type of teaching should stop in every country across Africa. In fact, it should be criminalized. This is a very serious threat to the national security of many African nations. African youths have come to believe this wrong ideology and have therefore decorated themselves with AK-47 and suicide belts. Now, Can Africa ever have peace and security with their youth carrying Kalashnikov and suicide belts? This is very, very serious.
Do not destroy my city and do not destroy the young because they are our assets. And we depend on our sons and daughters to feed us when we get out. And we need our children to buy the medicines, pay the hospital, wrap them with drugs. Do not destroy their minds. And I've been very clear with that. Do not destroy my country. Do not destroy our young people.
I urge you to spread this gospel in your various communities. Africa can never have security with their youths having this mindset, attitude, or conduct. Again, not only have African youth been brainwashed or programmed to kill each other and destroy their communities, they have also been brainwashed to hate hard work, critical reasoning, reading culture, and peaceful coexistence. They have been brainwashed to waste their valuable time watching movies for hours, doing makeup for hours, dancing for hours, being on social media for hours, gambling for hours, playing video games for hours, or engaging in violence for hours. They have little or no time for productive and meaningful endeavors. Those of them who hawk or symbolize violence, sex, crime, and fraud are the new class of celebrities within the African youths. You can imagine that. They are celebrated. But can the African youths with this mindset and values bring peace and security to the future of Africa? How do you believe that Africa will be peaceful and secure when most of the youths are already on drugs, in gangs, in violent cults, and are militia leaders that are making their respective communities ungovernable? Can this be the sign of peaceful and secure Africa? Now, enough of that. But what has this warfare done to the African culture? You may be asking now, what is the relationship between culture and national security? The essence of cultural subversion is to create chaos and lawlessness in the African homes and communities. When there is chaos and lawlessness in an African community, there will be no security in that community and even across that country. This is very simple, and that's how it works. So, if this syndrome is replicated across the country, then there will be chaos and lawlessness in that country. That is how it works. So, you need to understand the intrigues in this culture warfare. Now, listen to this. The Chinese are not pressured to abandon their culture. The Jews are not pressured to abandon their culture. The Saudis are not pressured to abandon their culture. Even the Indians are left with their own culture. The only people that must abandon their culture are the Africans. You need to ask yourself, why should that be? The culture warfare is a sophisticated type of warfare and part of the 21st century warfare in Africa. You will soon understand how it is crafted, the structures of its conveyance, the weapons of the war, as well as the combatants of the culture warfare. You need to stay tuned on this channel because an episode is solely dedicated to serve you culture warfare in greater details. So, for now, we'll have to stop here. By now, you can understand the devastating effects of the six structures on the African politics, the economy, the social structures, the culture, and above all, the hearts and minds of the African population. What you have heard so far is just the smallest part of what is to come. Remember, we are still in the introduction to the 21st century warfare in Africa. There are episodes solely dedicated to explain the different components of the 21st century warfare. But for now, just know that what is going on in Africa is an organized warfare called the 21st century warfare in Africa. Now that you have understood a few effects of the structures of this warfare, what is the 21st century warfare in Africa all about? How can it be defined? You want to know? Then stay tuned on this channel. That is what is coming up next. But make sure you don't miss it. So, see you in the next episode. Thank you for watching.